What if I told you that the best personal development book is actually not found in the self-help section in the bookshops? Yes, I said that right. I've read dozens and dozens of different personal development books over the last 10 plus years, and after a while, I'm sure you can probably relate to this, a lot of them start to sound the same. You may read Tony Robbins' books, you may read Jen Sincero's books, and they're incredible books. I've learned so much from them, but at some point, you kind of start getting the same message. Be consistent, focus on one thing, focus on your personal power. I'm not gonna go all along and drag it out in this episode, but I will tell you that I personally have gotten stuck with reading. And to be honest with you, I have not read a single personal development book in full for a couple of years now. I believe the last time I picked up a personal development book was 2021 maybe, and I don't even remember if I finished it. And I've read different books, I tried different things, and after a while I was like, it's just so hard. And I'm a person who has always been reading. I learned to read when I was 4 years old, and ever since I've been reading every single thing. I've always read almost in full the entire plan for the summer, because when I was in school, we would always get a list of books that we would have to read. And honestly, every single time I think about it, the list was always way too long, because what do you mean I'm supposed to read 20 or 30 books in 3 months? Anyway, the best personal development book that I've read this year has actually been more than one. It's been fantasy books like Fourth Wing. Another book that I'm showing for my YouTube viewers is The Throne of Broken Gods. I can go on and on about the fantasy books, but I have learned so much from these books, and I have gotten so much more inspiration this year just by reading about everything but business and social media and marketing. Now, why am I even talking about this? Because you generally see me talk about branding, social media, marketing, strategies, tactics, organic growth, video marketing. All of those things are great. But today I wanted to bring the conversation to a completely different realm. And the reason for that is by looking at the entire industry, specifically at the digital marketing industry, online coaching industry, participating in conversations where I kind of see the pattern, and I know that I'm not the only one. And maybe you're listening to this and you can relate and you feel like, man, I'm just so tired of everything being about business. And I know that some people are okay with that, but for me personally, I like to believe that I have a cool personality, at least that's what my friends say, and I'm pretty sure they're not lying. I like different things. I have always liked reading, I like different TV series, I like drawing, I have different hobbies and whatever. So I wanted to bring out a whole different conversation that is not about business, but at the same time, you can make it a bit about business if you wanted to. And the reason why I wanted to talk about fantasy books and smut books, and by the way, if you're not comfortable with smutty books or filthy books or reading about anything that kind of like on the wild spectrum, this podcast episode is probably not going to be for you, but we're not going to talk about anything crazy over here either. But just for your record, if you're not comfortable with that, you probably will want to tune out. But if you are into smutty books like myself, then we're going to get along just fine. We might have just became besties. Here's the thing about me that you need to know. If I enjoy doing something, I want to do more of that. And I've always been obsessed with business. I've always been very goal-oriented. So of course, when I start something, I want to keep going until I get the result that I want. But when it came to business, for a very long time, 6+ years, everything was about business. I remember working in front of the computer for hours, like 10, 12 hours a day, work day, right? Now, keep in mind, I've never had a full-time job. I've never had a side job, none of that kind of stuff. I've always been a contractor for other companies, for other personal brands. I found myself taking a break from business, closing the laptop, going for a fresh air, and then I would find myself listening to a business podcast. And then next time I'm taking a break, I found myself reading a book, and I have a shelf full of different books, and I'm probably wanting to clean a lot of them up because I read majority of them and I still want to read a couple of them, but at the same time I'm like, I just want to have a different bookshelf. Like, I'm so tired of seeing business books in my corner because that's just not something that I enjoy. And I'm not saying that I don't enjoy business. I do enjoy business and I do love what I do, but my entire life doesn't have to be about that. And neither does yours. Because here's the thing. I want you to give this one piece of advice. The things we consume for pleasure often shape us more than what we consume for productivity. And I'm not saying that personal development is not important. Of course it is. And if I were to start in business all over again, I probably would read all the books that I have read before. But I would also be very strategic. So maybe we're going to do a different episode about the must-read books, the books that I believe would really help you out with your business, with your personal growth, with your branding. There are some amazing books. And of course, you're going to take something out of each book. I'm not saying that's... Actually, I am saying that most of them are about the same exact thing. Business, marketing, branding, sales, whatever. There are books on different topics, but at some point you need to get yourself out of that bubble. You need to go and have some freaking fun and do things just for your own pleasure. Because was I reading business books to truly take a break? Was I reading books for fun? Was I reading business books for my own pleasure? Hell no. I was reading because I wanted to learn. That was the most affordable option at the time when I was 19 and 20 years old, when I didn't have any revenue coming in, when I didn't have any money. That was the only affordable option that I had where I could learn something. And of course, I was reading like a maniac. I was reading multiple different books. I was probably reading 2-3 books a month at some point and absorbing as much information as I could, and also listening to podcasts, which I still do. But there are also some really interesting podcast episodes that I have listened to lately that aren't necessarily about business. They're more about, the lifestyle, the personal fun things to do or whatever. So there's so much more outside of the business. And I want you to take this, especially if you're listening to this episode and maybe you're in your early 20s, or maybe you are still like in your late teenage years, right? Maybe you're 19 or 18, exactly the year when I first started. I want you to, yes, absorb as much information as you can. Hustle. Like, that's probably what I would do. If I were to start over in my 20s, I would still do a lot of the things that I have done before. But I would be more strategic with how I spend my time, and I would also be more strategic with the kind of information that I consume. And I would probably read more fantasy books, to be honest with you, because that's what I've always done when I was a kid. I would always read Chronicles of Narnia. I've watched Vampire Diaries probably about 5 or 7 times. I've been the Twilight girly before Vampire Diaries came along. I've watched, what is that movie? The Golden Compass, I think. So I've watched all the possible... Harry Potter, of course. So I've always been a fantasy girly, so I don't understand what happened when all of a sudden I was just the girl about business. I want you to give yourself permission to truly take breaks, whether it's completely taking Sunday off, whether unplugging for the evening and instead of reading a personal development book, picking up Fourth Wing, picking up whatever other book. Now, it doesn't even have to be Fourth Wing. If you're not into fantasy, there are plenty of contemporary romance books. You can read whatever you want. Or even if you're not into reading and you're listening to this just out of curiosity, pick up one of your hobbies. Start crocheting, make a soap, make a candle, whatever it is that you enjoy doing. Truly start taking breaks, because what I found in myself, every single time I do something non-business, one, I start attracting more leads and more potential clients. Literally recently, I've been deep into reading the Plated Prisoner series. I read 5 books in about 3 weeks. So it's been roughly taking me about 5 to 7 days to read one book, which I know is a very long time. I'm quite annoyed with myself because I do want to read faster, but we'll get there, okay? And I've had so much more fun reading that, and even highlighting. I still have like a slightly business brain on, right? Because I do highlight the key quotes or the things that characters say. Or you also learn so much about storytelling through those books, because a lot of the self-help books, they're structured like a very long article, right? And it's probably not the best comparison, but that's the best one that I can give you here. Fiction books are structured like proper storytelling, especially if it's a really good book. Like the very first fantasy book that I've read this year in January, it's been Fourth Wing, and I've been absolutely obsessed. I have the entire series in a physical format. One of my clients actually gave it to me for my birthday, and I'm so grateful because I cannot wait to reread the books. And that has been my first exposure. And then I was like, wow, there's some really freaking amazing books. And now this book is a bestseller, so I'm not saying that every single other book is gonna come even close to this, but there are so many freaking incredible books that I've read. One of them is actually being Manacled, and it's really hard to talk about this book because it is fan fiction. Now, if you've ever read that particular book, please message me on Instagram so we can have a conversation. Honestly, I've been obsessing over this book since I started. I cried my eyeballs out for it, and I started rereading it, and then I started crying again, and I had to put it down for a little bit. But that book, you know what those books do to you? I'm going to use this book as an example because I picked that book up in May. It probably took me about 2 weeks to read it because it was around 1,000 pages. And I saw myself in the main character. Now, for context, Manacled is a fanfiction book in the Hermione series. So it's the love story between Hermione and Draco. It's a fiction of the fiction, right? So it's not the actual ending of the Harry Potter, but it's the authors who pick up the story and then they add their own twists, and it's a very twisted story. And I saw myself so much in that character, and a lot of the trauma that she's experienced, I picked it up in myself, and I realized, wow, I've actually not healed a lot of the things in myself. And those are the kind of things that I never really see in self-help books, because you kind of read the theory, but here you see it on practice. You see the characters experiencing some really crappy situations, and then you're like, wow, I can actually really relate. And we're going to talk about the kind of work and the kind of things that you can work on during reading those books. But for me personally, there's a very small number of books that has really touched me in a way that Manacled touched me, because Fourth Wing, like, yes, I cried and I had a lot of fun reading that book, but Manacled, that specific book, I felt like that was the greatest personal development book that I have read. Now, I will say not every single person is going to relate to that book. I think the kind of woman that's going to relate to that book in a really deep and meaningful way would be somebody who would relate to Hermione. So if you have been a Harry Potter girl, and when you were, because I watched all those movies in cinema every single time they came out, almost every single, I think every single one of them I've seen in the movies actually, because they would always come out in summer. And yeah, so I've watched all of them. And I always related to Hermione because she was that nerd, the overachiever, perfectionist, and I was the exact same way. I'm still the exact same way. But I could always relate to her as a character, and I think that's why that particular book really hit me hard. Now, I will say this, depending on when you listen to this episode, there is a book that's coming out from that author, so it's an adaptation of the story, so the book is actually getting published. It's going to be called Alchemized. Again, if you want to talk about it, message me on Instagram. I would love to talk to you about any kind of books. If you've been into fantasy, I want to talk to you because I do want more friends who are into books, because honestly, there's not enough friends who are into the books. That's all I'm going to say. Now, let's shift the conversation and talk about what those books actually unlock. Let's get more specific. And I'm kind of probably going to sell you a little bit on why you should read those books. Now, a quick preface. Every single book that I've read is romance. There's always some sort of relationship happening in the book. There's always a massive plot. There's either politics, there's war, there are dragons. I've mostly read fantasy books this year. I haven't really read any contemporary, but the stories always include some sort of love stories. There's always something funny as well. And I've been reading about a lot of strong female characters in particular. So if you're a guy and you're listening to this, Honestly, I don't even know why you're still listening to this, but if you are, feel free to pick any of those books up. And I'm kind of curious what men think of those books, because I know there are a handful of men who are into the fantasy books as well. I've seen several creators on Instagram and TikTok, and I'm kind of curious what men think of them. I probably should talk to more guys who are into those books. But anyway, if you're a woman and if you're into reading those kinds of books as well, you probably are into the really strong characters. And that's, for me personally, I love a good badass woman in the book. I don't really like weak characters because, first of all, I don't relate to them. And I don't call myself a feminist. I've never called myself that, but I do love women in power. And this book in particular, The Fourth Wing, has really unlocked that. I freaking love the character who like pretends like she's all frail and then she's just a complete badass and can kick anybody's ass. So those kinds of books, they unlock a couple of different things. First of all, it's about the desire, and essentially the female characters, they own whatever they want without an apology. And I especially love the kind of stories, the trope, I believe that's what it's called, is enemies to lovers, because there's that angst and they don't want to fall in love with the male character who's morally gray, who's not a good guy, or like pretends to be a bad guy, but in reality he's a good guy, but whatever. So I love when a woman still is like, I still want him and I'm still gonna do whatever it takes to get what I want. Or whether it's like some sort of power. For example, I'm going to use Plated Prisoner as an example. I'm going to try not to give out any spoilers in case you haven't read the book, because I hate when people do spoilers, and I'm not going to be that kind of person. So there is a point in the book where a female character is trying to learn how to control her power, and she's at first in denial as usual. She's like, no, I can't do this, like it's just so uncontrollable, it just gets out of me and I ruin things and blah blah blah. And then when she gets to the point of like, okay, but I do see what I've done before, when she realizes, oh, my power can do 1, 2, and 3. If I could control all 3 of these things, that would be freaking amazing. So when she comes to that realization, she's like, okay, so I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna own who I am. I'm gonna own the kind of power that I have. That always is so amazing, because you realize that you can do the exact same thing if you hold any kind of power, which all of us do. You just have to own it without apologizing. You probably heard this a million times. If you've listened to multiple podcasts, I'm sure you've heard women say, become unapologetic and don't give a crap about what other people think. It's kind of true. You have to get to that point to own yourself, essentially, and your power. The next thing that the fantasy books unlock is a choice. Because if it's written from a female perspective, which usually it is, there's sometimes 2 different points of views, but usually it's like who is the main character, and it's about her choosing her own path, even when it breaks the rules. Another thing that those smutty books help you unlock is the power, which is kind of obvious. I know I've mentioned this already a couple of times, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but you sometimes, through the characters, you realize where your own power lays. And I think, honestly, that's one of the best parts about those books. Like I mentioned earlier, I personally love seeing really strong female characters. And I'm not saying this from like a feminism perspective or anything like this. Just when women know who they know the power that they hold, and they're willing to do anything for their loved ones, for their family, for their own good even. So I personally believe that seeing that through the books is so incredible, especially when other women are writing it, because you can kind of tell what message women want to hear. It's not about I don't want to bring this topic up too terribly much because it can get nasty over here, but there is a certain level of feminism that I personally do not vibe with. Feel free to DM me and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. Not my area of expertise, not my topic that I want to discuss here, but You probably know what I'm talking about. Every single movement that's taken to an extreme can be quite harmful. Let's just put it that way. So I love seeing that in books. I love seeing the strong female characters in books where it's not over exaggerated. And one of my favorite things that fantasy books bring out is the shadow work. And I believe this is one of the most important work that you're going to do on yourself, on your character, on your personal development. And it's so awesome to see that through books. And it's kind of unlocking through justifying the behavior of morally gray characters. I'm going to use Plated Prisoner as an example because the trope of enemies to lovers is so popular. It's in so many books. But in Plated Prisoner, there is a character that is technically considered to be a villain by everybody. But then he kills people. And then you look at supposedly morally gray character, and he's bad, and this crazy guy that everybody considers him insane, and he holds too much power and all those things. And you start justifying that and realizing that he's actually not the bad guy, and he's doing a lot of the bad things for the good of his own people. And it's not even for himself. He doesn't do things necessarily to put himself first. He's putting the woman he loves first, he's putting the people he loves first, everybody essentially above himself. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but at the same time, you'll learn so much of the shadow work and you discover so many things about yourself. I'm not saying that it's okay to do messed up things for the good, but there are certain scenarios where I would actually side with the morally gray characters, and it kind of makes you realize you're not necessarily the villain, but you're kind of exploring the darker side, not the evil or devil side or anything like this. But we can't always be good, right? We can't always be this unicorn and rainbows kind of energy. You still have to be a little bit of the villain. Sometimes, I'm going to give you a specific example. When you work with clients, and I'm going to use my own example because I have been maybe a little bit morally gray with my clients, but they kind of seem to like that. When clients hire me in particular, they always want honesty. They know that they're going to get it from me. They want honesty, integrity, no BS kind of advice. They are ready for me to tell them straight. And I never hold anything back. Every time I do strategy sessions, every time I have clients, even back when I was doing social media management, I would always tell it to people straight. No matter whether you like it or hate it, I'll give you the advice that you deep down know that you need, but you're afraid a little bit. Because we don't hire coaches to receive everything on a silver platter. We don't hire coaches for them to tell us, you're doing amazing, sweetie. No, we're hiring because we want the real stuff. Like, we want actual advice. We want them to tell us what it is that we do. When I have conversations with my coach, when I ask for feedback and she tells me I'm going to be hard on you or I'm going to be really honest with you even if you don't like it, I'm like, please give it to me. Because I've had coaches when they would give me advice, and sure, it would be good advice, but I don't want to hire a coach who's going to tell me you're doing everything great. Then I'm like, then why the hell did I hire you? Why am I paying you X amount of money to tell me that I'm doing good? Because I can call my mom and she's gonna tell me I'm doing great. She's not my coach, she's my mom. So I don't need the mom energy when I'm working with coaches. I do want you to be morally gray. So I'm gonna give you that kind of piece of advice. When you work with clients, give them a little bit of that kind of taste. Or when you are hiring coach, make sure that first of all, you're ready to receive the raw and real feedback. Because if you listen to this and you're maybe thinking, oh, like maybe I'm ready for a coach, I want to work with somebody, I need feedback on my content, I need feedback on my emails, my copy, whatever, and if the person is going to be me, then just know that I'm going to tell you honestly what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. I'm going to give you the things that you are doing right because there's always something that we're doing right, but at the same time, I will tell you where you're messing up. And also, when you relate to morally gray characters. They're known for breaking the rules, being the bad guy. I want you to think, what does it mean for you to be good or bad? Like, define that to yourself. Are you bad because you're giving too direct of advice? Are you bad because you're not afraid to say what everybody else is thinking, but is too afraid to voice that? Are you bad because you're maybe a little bit arrogant, but like not in a crazy arrogant way? Or are you a little bit too self-confident? I know sometimes that pisses people off. They really don't like that. I'm actually going to say that, in my opinion, in my morally gray opinion, it's okay to be a little bit arrogant when you know you are exceptional at what you do, when you know that the work you put out there is way better than anybody else. When not only that you know that, but your clients also back that up. In those cases, I do believe that it's okay to be a little bit morally gray and be slightly cocky. But again, not over exaggerated, because there's a fine line between being a little bit overconfident and being flat out an asshole. And to wrap this episode up, I want to give you some final notes regarding reading smutty books, reading fiction books, reading everything but nonfiction. You don't always need a mindset coach, although, yes, they are needed, and mindset is one of the most important things. But I will say that sometimes you need a spicy book, or even if you're not into that, although if you're still listening to this episode, you probably are into that and you relate to everything I've shared, or a lot of the things that I've shared. You need that kind of book that's going to remind you of your own fire. Because if you are a woman and you're listening to this episode and you're going to read any book, I'm going to use Manacled as an example. It is a fan fiction. I don't believe you can download it anywhere right now. So if you want to read it, message me, I'll send it to you, and I have the PDF file, okay? So it's not for resale or anything. You can learn so much about your own power, about your own authority, about your own strengths, weaknesses, and even the parts that you still need to heal. Because I personally believe that there's not a single person in the world that is completely healed from whatever trauma they have. I think we're all messed up in one way or another. That's my personal belief. And through those books, you do realize your own power, what's healed, what's not healed, the shadow work that you still have to do. Even, let's say, if you're single, you may even realize what kind of qualities you're looking for in a potential partner. I will say, though, a lot of these man characters in the books, completely unrealistic. So do not strive for something over exaggerated, but you will see what you like and what you don't like. And that's all I'm going to say regarding that. So don't be afraid to indulge in smut books, fiction books. Don't be afraid to take a break from your business, because why are you growing it in the first place? Why are you in business in the first place? You're not there to create another job for yourself. You're there to create that free time so you can spend it enjoying the book, a cup of coffee, a slow morning, a freaking Pilates class and matcha. That's why you're working, not so you can constantly read business books just because Joe Schmo told you so. Let your obsessions shape your expressions, because that's what fiction books really allow you to do. Now I want to ask you, what is a book that you recently read that you're absolutely obsessed with? Message me on Instagram and let me know, and if I haven't read it, I'm going to make sure that I read it or add it to my never-ending to be read list. And if I have, then we're definitely going to have a great chat.